Marcio. He is an expert in the field. He actually went to UC Berkeley for undergrad. He studied bioengineering. Then he got a PhD at MIT for biological engineering. He's done a lot of work in stand-ups. In stand-ups. I'm watching a lot of comedy. He's done a lot of work in startups. He won the Clean Energy Prize, right?
Sort of. Actually, I organized it, but
I'm sorry. Okay. He's worked as a product manager at Dropbox, as a head of product management at Doximity, and he's currently working on something new. That's what he told me to say. So I'll let him introduce his new project in a bit. Please give him a round of applause.
Hi, thanks, Augustine, and thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate having the opportunity to chat with you. I'll be talking today a little bit about myself, why I think startups are super exciting, tell you some of the learnings that I've had from the 5 startups that I've been a part of, and then tell you some startup myths that maybe you've heard about and I can help debunk. And I'd love to have lots of time for Q&A. Feel free to interrupt me and just raise your hand and ask questions. I'd love to for this to be super interactive. And before I get started, just so I can kind of understand who you all are, can I just get a show of hands? Like, who here's a freshman? A few awesome sophomores, juniors, seniors, super seniors, grad students. Anyone I'm missing? No? Cool. All right. Awesome. Okay. So that should fit right in, and hopefully this all makes sense to you. So a little bit about myself. I'm actually from Brazil originally. I moved to the U.S. in '96, and that was like my family's first startup. Was let's do life in America. It's been working out great. So it was a successful one. As Augustine mentioned, I did do a bioengineering degree here and graduated in '05. I actually took what was then called the computational biology track. I don't know if that exists anymore or not, but essentially it was like a lot of pre-med and a lot of computer science. And so that kind of set me up really well to work in the startup world, where CS can help a lot. But that wasn't my primary degree. I was also in Delta Upsilon, which is a social fraternity. I was a president there and treasurer as well. That turned out to be really valuable experience. Fraternity is like a complicated business with lots of turnover and lots of risk management. It turns out that startups also have a lot of those qualities, so that turned out to be super useful. And I was really lucky to work with Professor Dan Fletcher, that anyone in engineering may have heard of. I believe he's the head, the chair of bioengineering now. He had just landed on campus, and he had a brand new lab and lots of exciting projects to work on. And I got to work really closely with him. And kind of one of the main themes of my talk and the advice I always give: try to pick the best possible mentors that you can work with, and work really closely from them and learn from them. So that really helped me. Because of that work with Dan, is actually what helped me get into MIT, where I did this PhD. I worked on cancer biomarkers, like really technical stuff. And while I was doing that, I realized I didn't want to be an academic. I didn't want to stay in academic research. And I started getting involved with business school classes, going to lectures in places like these. And the Sloan is the business school at MIT. I actually helped plan a business plan competition there, and that's what kind of got me started into like, oh hey, these the startup thing is pretty awesome. I should be a part of that. So I'm going to kind of run briefly through these 5 startups that I've been involved with, and then I'll talk about some of the lessons that I've taken from them later. And you don't have to take notes if you don't want to, but I know, up to you. I'm not going to test you on this. But you should be writing down questions if anything comes to you, because I love to answer questions from you. Okay, so the first startup I was involved in was called Message Party. And I started this with a bunch of friends from MIT right as I was wrapping my PhD. And kind of the thesis there was we noticed that students were spending a lot of time on Facebook. Facebook at the time was diversifying to go from just being for college students to being for everyone. And we thought like, oh, there's all these things college students need that Facebook is not going to provide. Like study groups and like choosing a class and finding a job. And so the thesis was, let's build something for them. And we were lucky to get some startup funding from Y Combinator, which is a really great program that helps startups get going. But then we ran into some challenges, and I'll talk about them later. Essentially, startups are really hard, and it's really tough to get traction. And we wound up having some issues, which actually caused that team to kind of implode. So I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of how that went, how that happened, and then what I did later. So I actually moved on and then started another company called Decratic. And the thesis there was actually similar to the one from before, which is if you build an online community and free tools that folks can use and use with their colleagues and use with their friends, then you can attract a lot of people and you can build a business or monetize those people in other ways. And so the idea, again, was going to be essentially LinkedIn for doctors, so a professional network where physicians would have profiles, they could post questions, talk to each other, and then get job offers, very similar to the first company. So I actually went and built that over about 6 months, got an engineer to help me launch the product, had about 100 physician users, which is pretty good. Physicians are actually super busy, and it's hard to get any of them to use your stuff. And while I was doing the fundraiser for the Craddock, I ran into this other company that was essentially doing the exact same thing when they announced that they had raised $10 million, and their founder was a really respected and well-known figure in this world of software for physicians. He had actually founded a company called Hippocrates, which is a drug reference app, back on the Palm Pilot, one of the first apps on the App Store. And every doctor I talked to loved Hippocrates, and they were all super excited about joining this community that Jeff Tangney, the CEO, was going to create. And so I essentially looked at that and I felt like, I'm definitely onto a great idea. This really smart and successful guy is basically doing the exact same thing. Now I have this choice: do I want to compete with him, or maybe I want to join forces with him? So let me talk to him and figure out, what is his plan and what makes the most sense for me. And so I wound up actually getting acquired by Doximity. I had a bunch of conversations with Jeff. I was really impressed by the team there, and I'll talk a little more about how do you know if a startup is a good opportunity for you or not, which is a really, I think, important thing for you. Turned out Doximity was a really great opportunity, and so I had a really good run there as product manager and then director of product, and basically helped build out a bunch of the teams there, launched a bunch of apps, helped raise a lot of money. And that company is doing really well. They now have something like 80% of physicians signed on. The revenue growth is really good, and it's an awesome experience for me, both in terms of what I learned financially and a bunch of other ways. So from there, after 3 years, I went to Dropbox. I'm guessing most of you have probably heard about Dropbox. Is that true? Okay, cool. I know files are not as important in college campuses these days as they used to be, but Dropbox is doing super well. That was a little bit of like a startup within a startup experience, where Dropbox had done really well in the consumer space and with a product for individuals to buy, and they were trying to launch a product for businesses to buy. And there's a really big difference in making a product for consumers versus making a product for individuals. And so Dropbox was kind of going through this challenge. How do we make the business product? How do we make something that has HIPAA compliance so that doctors can use? And how do we make something that large enterprises can buy? Which turns out a lot of enterprises, like pharma companies, were buying things from Doximity, so I had a lot of experience in that. So I could bring that experience and help launch the Dropbox for Business product, which is also doing really, really well. I can't share the numbers or anything. Dropbox is still a pre-IPO company, but they'll probably be coming out relatively soon, at least that's the rumor, and Dropbox for Business is a big part of what's making that company successful now. Okay, so that's a little bit about the experiences that I had, as a founder, kind of getting acquired, being a product manager, and then I left earlier this year to take all these lessons and build something new. So I'm in the process right now of starting my next company, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that's like. But essentially, for me, that means taking all these lessons that I've had so far, all the great people that I've worked with, and kind of my knowledge of these markets, especially the healthcare market. Of kind of understanding what are the opportunities there and how do I build a product from scratch that is going to find customers and that's going to hopefully be as successful as Doximity and Dropbox are, or perhaps get picked up along the way as the Craddock was by a larger company. Any of those outcomes for me would be really terrific. Okay, so that was me kind of talking a lot. Any questions so far? Do you guys know what a product manager is? Can anyone tell me? What is a product manager?
It's like bridging the gap between the engineering team and the people who know what the end vision of the product should be.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's the business folks, and then there's the technical folks, and someone's got to bring them together. And in most tech companies now, that role is filled by the product manager. It's a pretty cool position because you have to kind of know a little bit about both sides and be able to communicate with both sides. And you also are in charge of a team. Because products are usually not built by individuals, so you have to lead a team and be able to deliver something that has value to your customers and to the business. And so it helps to have a bit of a technical background and then also solid leadership skills. and understand the fundamentals of like who are your customers and what do they want. So that's a pretty cool position, especially in the tech world where the strength of the product is just so powerful, as opposed to in more traditional industries where product decisions were typically led by marketing or by finance. Whereas in technology businesses, a lot of these decisions are actually made by product managers. So it's a good place to be. Okay, so that's a little bit about me and so far. Question?
So why did you leave Dropbox to make something new? Like, can't you like work part-time on your own project and then work at Dropbox?
Absolutely, and that's actually, you're beating me to one of the lessons and takeaways. It's really hard to build a startup from scratch when you're not working anywhere. And the best way to do it once you're out of school is usually to work on the side while you're still working full-time somewhere else. And so that's by far the most kind of common path. For me, it just so happened that I worked on a really massive project at Dropbox. And when I launched it, and I was kind of done, the strategic direction of the company shifted a little bit. And I would have needed to have made like a multi-year commitment to have stayed there in a more senior role. And I just didn't want to make that commitment because I knew I was ready to do something new. Plus I was in a position where I could take some time and work on something myself. But yeah, that's a great question, and I definitely suggest the former if that can work out for you. Cool, any other questions? Yeah.
Can you please tell us about your experience raising money for your company, especially for the very first company of yours?
Sure. So, fundraising is interesting. The Bay Area is definitely, the best place in the world to get funding for a technology company, and you're all kind of part of that community just by being here, just by being in Berkeley. You have people that are far more successful and have far more money than me who come by campus and are looking for folks like you. I would say that the things that make a company fundable, I'll talk about some of them, but in general, the things that make a good business are the same things that make a business fundable. And so the way to think about raising money is not like, I want to raise money, how do I do it? The way to think about raising money is, I'm going to build a great business. How do I build a great business? And then if you're building a great business, investors are going to want to invest in you because they're going to want their money to grow, and they're going to want you help you build your great business. So I think one of the kind of mistakes that I made and maybe some other folks might make is they tend to overemphasize like, what's going to make investors happy? Like, how do I raise money? How do I become a funded startup? Because it's like it's definitely a milestone, and like, hey, it's money. Like, it's awesome. You can hire people and really push on something. But it turns out that the far more important thing is how do you build that great business? Like, how do you identify customers? How do you build a team? All those things, and then the great investors come to you. Now, Y Combinator is actually a little bit of an anomaly because they try to take folks like you that are typically, fresh out of school or maybe don't have a lot of experience running businesses, and they try to teach the founders, like, how do you become a startup CEO? And it's in many ways like a brutal program. You're working like 24/7 with your founders. They actually want you to live with your co-founders so that you are never not working. Like, if you are awake, you are working, which is really stressful. And the way that you get into Y Combinator is with this paper application, which is very unusual. It's not how most investment decisions get made in the Valley. But it is definitely a great path. I definitely recommend YC if that's something that is interesting to you. But I'll also say that's actually a minority or relative exception. The vast majority of ways people get funded is you build something that's exciting, or you have a vision and a background that makes you a good founder, and then you find angel investors, or they find you, and then they give you money. Cool. Any other questions? These are great, by the way. Okay. So let's keep going. So why startups? So a couple things for me. One, I want to have big impact. I want to help build a future. And two, I want to future-proof my career. I didn't want to be in a spot where I would get like laid off one day and not have another place to go because my skills were not in demand. And I'll talk a little bit more about those two things and kind of how I see things playing out in the world. We live in super exciting times. We see that technology is changing everything. When I was on the BART ride over from the city, like 70% of people were on their phones, during the subway ride. And that's totally normal, right? We don't bat an eye when we see that. 10 years ago, like, that was not the case. People would be reading books. Maybe there would be like one person on the laptop that did not have, an internet connection. So that's a massive transformation. So we all have these supercomputers in our pocket that's changing how we communicate, how we buy, how we work, how we get around, how we learn, so many other things. And then this one is really important. Because technology changes how we work, it actually changes every industry. So it's not just the technology industry where things are changing because of tech. It's every industry. It's retail, it's healthcare, it's travel, it's lodging. Come on in, let's go. There's a seat right over there. So essentially that means that I have this analogy of the business world in terms of biology and evolution. As you saw, I have this biology background. So you can think of the business world as essentially a collection of niches. And every company is like a species. And some companies are better suited to their surroundings, and so they grow. Like Homo sapiens is really well suited to Earth right now, so we've grown. Other companies are less suited to their environments, and so they shrink and often go extinct. And as we've seen, in evolutionary history, every now and then there's some event, like when the asteroid that supposedly wiped out the dinosaurs, where it just reshapes the niches, the opportunities that are available in that environment. And in this case, of course, the dinosaurs went extinct, and there was a new set of species that thrived afterwards. It's a lot like that in the business world. When something like technology comes along, like connected computers, machine learning, all these things, it changes what all the niches are. And so it makes it so that the existing incumbents are just not as well adapted to these new spaces. And it gives opportunities for new companies, for new organizations to come and occupy those niches and to grow sometimes really quickly. So that's really exciting. We're in this really exciting time right now. It's basically the asteroids are like falling nonstop, like mobile phones, the web, machine learning now, globalization is also a huge part of this. So that means that kind of the pillars of the old economy and the things that used to be really secure jobs are actually not really secure anymore. And that can be kind of scary, right? Now, I put these companies up here. I don't mean to pick on them. Merck and HP are amazing companies. They have amazing products, amazing people who work there. But they also have faced some challenges. And if you're an organic chemist at Merck in New Jersey, chances are you've gotten laid off or you're about to be laid off. And all the other companies that hire people with your skills are also laying people off. So you're going to have to switch careers, after decades of doing that. That's a tough position to be in. And Hewlett Packard, in many ways, they have their own set of challenges. Why startups? It's well, I don't want to be one of those statistics, and I also see this opportunity to be one of these new players. And so another way to think about this, just look at who are the companies that are having the most impact in the world. And there's a public measure of this, which is the market cap of public companies. How much does the market say that these companies are worth? And you go back 10 years and you look at what were the 10 biggest public companies. You'll see a bunch of oil companies, industrials, banks. Those were the big guys, right? They were the ones that ruled the economy, that had the best paying jobs. And most of them had been around for a long, long time. It took ExxonMobil 100 years to get to be one of these big companies. You go forward 10 years, you look at now, and that list is really different. 7 of these 10 companies are basically technology companies. 5 of them were founded within the last 20 years. That's amazing. In the last 20 years, 5 of these companies have gone from nothing, like a brand new species, to being one of the 10 biggest companies in the world. That's just incredible. And you definitely see that the traditional kind of companies are no longer nearly as represented. So that to me is a really clear public sign. I don't think this is a bubble. I don't think this is going to change. There's definitely going to be fluctuations. Maybe Apple is worth half of what it is today in 5 years. Who knows? But I think technology companies will continue to dominate. And I think technology-enabled businesses, like say an Airbnb, which is in the lodging industry, they help you find space. But they're really a software company, right? They don't own any hotels. They don't own any space. If you ask them, are you a software company? They probably won't say yes. They'll say, no, we're a hospitality company. We're a travel company. But really, they're a software company at core, right? And so that's what we're seeing in every sector of the economy. And there's this famous quote by this guy, Marc Andreessen. He created the first web browser, became Netscape, and then became Firefox. Now he's a big shot investor. So he calls it software is eating the world. So again, it's just that notion, right? The whole economy is changing, and you want to be on the right side of that. Okay, that was a lot. Any questions so far on this? No? Okay. He's really smart. If you can find his writings and kind of keep up with what he's saying, I suggest you do that. Okay, then the last thought. I mentioned that you have these niches that are open when the economy is changing. One thing that's really awesome about being an entrepreneur, about being a founder, or being involved in a company as it's growing, is you get to basically design organizations that are going to live in these market niches. And that's a really cool thing, because if you succeed, then this thing that you helped create will grow, and it will create value for its customers, it will create value for its employees, it will create value for its founders, and hopefully becomes an enduring company that's a really positive contribution to the world. And so, unlike in biology where things take millions of years and a lot of random events are happening, you can actually put your thinking hat on and learn how to be an entrepreneur, learn how to be a founder or a product manager, work for a startup, and you can help these new niches become occupied faster. Okay, so that's a little bit about startups. Oh yeah, I didn't want to be like too positive and say startups, startups, startups. So just because the company's doing really well, it doesn't mean it's a surefire thing. I don't mean to pick on these guys. Again, great companies, but these were two public companies, Zynga and Rocket Fuel. You can't quite make out, but their stock price was really high in like 2012 and 2014, and now it's really low, which means that these companies have basically shrunk a lot, and all the employees' equity became worthless, and they may go out of business or get bought pretty soon. So there's definitely still risk in this new world. Every new species, every new company is not guaranteed to succeed, but that's just something you have to balance. Okay, cool. All right, so now moving on. So 5 learnings, things that I've learned from my startup experiences that hopefully can help you. First one, a founding team is like a marriage. So if you've had experience, with a long-term relationship, you probably learned that it can be really awesome, but it can be really difficult. You probably don't want to get married with someone after the first date. You want to get to know them really well. You want to make sure you have shared values and kind of shared goals. When things happen like graduation, if one person wants to move to Australia and the other wants to move to New York, like that's probably going to be, put a strain on the relationship. So companies are a lot like that. It takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years to build a company. And it's a lot of commitment. We talked about Y Combinator, you're living with these people for 3 months. Like that's what married people do, they live together. So that relationship in the founding team is one that is very difficult to get right. And actually in that first company that I started, I recruited 3 people to be on the founding team with me. And then we ran into some issues, as every startup does. And we wound up having a deadlock where 2 people wanted to go in one direction and 2 people wanted to go in a different direction. And we were not able to resolve that, and it became really like acrimonious, and eventually the company split up. And I left the company after it had gotten some funding, but while it was still in this kind of limbo state. And that was really painful, right? That's like starting a family and being married to someone, and then it's not working out, and then you leave. Like it was kind of traumatic, and I still I can't quite process it. I just don't want to think about it too much. But it wasn't like any one person's fault. Like, I wouldn't say it was my fault. It wasn't any of the other co-founders' faults. We just had different ideas and different values in terms of what we wanted the company to be. And we hadn't adequately talked about them and kind of vetted. Like, does this make sense for us all to be working together? For example, do we have the right skill sets that map to the challenge that that we're facing in building the kind of company we want to build? Do we avoid redundancies? You don't want to have 2 people who both think they own the product vision because they're just going to be arguing all the time. So, if you're thinking about putting a founding team together, think about things like, have you worked with this person before? Have you known them for a long time? Have you had lots of deep conversations about, what do you want to do and why and who's going to do what? And when things don't go well, what are the alternatives? So you really want to, put a lot of thought into that. The other thing I'll say. Finding co-founders is really hard when you're outside of school because once you're in the working world, most people, once they have a job, they're just going to stay in that job until something happens to them where they leave or they want to change. Whereas in college or in school, all of you have this timer that you're all going to graduate, and in 5 years, none of you is going to be an undergrad anymore, hopefully. So essentially that means that there's a much richer pool of potential co-founders here, and you have all this time that you're spending, after school and in summers, that you can be working on ideas together and figuring out, like, is this a good person for me to be a co-founder with? And you really don't have that after you graduate. So it's actually a great opportunity while you're in college. It's not an accident that a lot of the iconic founding teams, like Microsoft, like Facebook, those founding teams were all college buddies, basically. Zuckerberg's #2 guy at Facebook was like his roommate, I believe, or lived down the hall from him. With Microsoft, Bill Gates had like 2 poker buddies, which were Paul Allen and then Steve Ballmer, and those became his core 2 employees. So it's not an accident. Chances are, if you're going to start something, you'll be with someone you have met here. Okay, second lesson. Become valuable, then the opportunities find you. Essentially, this means, again, if you want to be involved in startups, don't think about like, how do I get involved in startups? Think about, how do I become valuable to a startup? Or how do I create a valuable startup? And if you do that, the investors will find you. Like, they will email you and say, I heard, you're creating this great thing. Like, I want to give you money. Like, that actually happens, and it's awesome. And you want to be in that situation. You don't want to be in the situation of, going around and saying, like, I want to be a founder, please give me money. Like, that's not the people who do as well. Now, I did want to kind of emphasize, like, what are valuable skills? And again, in no particular order, and I'm missing some. But you think about, like, what does a business actually need? It's the things that are listed here, right? They don't need like a chemistry major. They need one of these terms, and I actually deciphered what they mean. So like engineering, you need to build stuff. QA, it has to work. Marketing, you have to identify customers and help them identify you. Sales, you have to sell to them. Support, you keep your customers happy. Recruiting, you sell to potential future employees that are going to help you grow. Benefits, you keep your people happy. Partnerships, how do you sell to other businesses' customers so you can sell more? Legal and compliance, how do you avoid getting suckered or getting sued or getting arrested? Finance, how do you avoid running out of money? Communications, how do you tell your story clearly? Analysis and research, how do you learn from your data and from other people's data? Leadership, how do you keep your entire team rowing in the same direction? Right? Like, these are the things that businesses need. Because all of these things, getting customers, finding customers, like, that's what makes the business work. Like, being smart, having a great degree, is not something that a business needs from you. Those are like signs that you can do these other things that are actually valuable. So like when a business comes to recruit at Berkeley, they know that you're smart, they know that you work hard, and they're looking for you to either already know one of these things or to develop these skills over time. And it's the same for a founding team. If you're a founder, what's kind of fun and terrifying is you get to do all of these things at the same time. And you kind of have to be able to not massively screw up any one of them too much so that it kills the company. But you can get other people to help you as well. Okay, so that's valuable skills. Next, understanding power laws. This is really important, and I'm guessing maybe new for you. Do folks know what a power law is? Anyone? No? Okay, yeah, this is important. Yeah, remember this. You probably are all familiar with a normal distribution, like a bell curve it's called, or a Gaussian. Let's say I took the height of everyone in this room, and then I plotted it in a histogram. Chances are most of you are between like 5 foot and 6 foot. You're going to be clustered around a certain average. Maybe a few people are on the shorter side, like me. Maybe a few people are on the taller side. But there's not any one person here that's like twice as tall as the average. Like, that's just not how that distribution works, right? Now, this is a distribution of like a job or a company in something like a factory. Someone that's making widgets. If you take someone that has like a skilled laborer in a factory and you ask, how many widgets can you produce per hour? Chances are you're going to get some distribution like this, where most people are making some number of widgets. Some factory workers are a little bit slower, some are a little bit faster, but there's not any one factory worker that can make like 10 times as many widgets as someone else, right? Like, so that's kind of like that's how the old economy works essentially. This is why we had a middle class. It's because there was a bunch of things that needed to get done that kind of average people with average skills could get done, and the amount of value wasn't too low, it wasn't too high, but it was enough for them to like buy a house and have health insurance and stuff. The economy is changing. We are no longer in an average or normal distribution world. We're now in a power law world, and a power law is really different. And what happens in a power law is that the highest number of individuals or entities is actually producing very little value. And kind of the average amount there's actually a lot fewer people here. And there's a very small number of individuals that are creating a lot of value. Like this kind of stretches on like, like Zuckerberg and Bill Gates are over here basically. So like that's the economy that we're moving into now. Where if you are that average worker with average manual labor skills in an average place in the world, you no longer have like a middle level of value, you have like a very low amount of value. And that's why we kind of don't have a middle class anymore. Or at least there's a lot of challenges on a societal level to figure that out. Now what this means for you, or actually, now why does that happen? So think about like retail and supermarkets. There used to be a supermarket in every town, and there was an opportunity for there to be like a regional supermarket and a small supermarket and like all these stores where you bought stuff, and they all would have their own president and their own CEO, managers, all these people making like a good living. And then Amazon comes along, and with software, they create like a better logistics system that is way more efficient than what any of these stores can do. They need way fewer people, because once you code up the logistics once, you don't need a person to be like manning the phones and saying like, oh, is this shipment arrived? Ship this shipment in that way or the other way. It's all software, right? And so it's a very small number of people who wrote that software, and an even smaller number of people who kind of funded and directed them to write that software. And now Amazon is basically like wiping out retail, all across the country. And when Amazon, went to buy Whole Foods, maybe some of you, heard about that acquisition happened recently. To give you like a sense of the size, and Whole Foods is like is 10 years older as a company than Amazon. But Amazon is so much more valuable than Whole Foods that the day that Amazon bought Whole Foods for like $15 billion, their stock price went up 1.5%. Like Amazon's stock price like barely changed. And that little change in the Amazon stock price was more than what they paid for Whole Foods, which is amazing, right? So essentially, these tech companies and the people that work in them, they're over here. And if you're kind of stuck in the old economy, you're no longer here, you're moving to there. So hopefully this is getting the point across. Like, the future is not going to be like the past, and you want to be sure that you either have that skill set yourself, or you're in a company that's doing that. Now another way that I thought about this and how it relates to me, when I joined Doximity, and I was building Docratic, we weren't trying to compete against LinkedIn like head on. We weren't trying to be the second best professional network. Because the second best of anything in the tech world is usually a big loser, and like the third best is definitely like that. Think of Facebook, like there's the one general purpose social network. Friendster, Bebo, like all the other ones are basically dead. But the way you get around that is not like, oh, throw your hands up, everything's been done. You carve up the market into smaller segments. So for example, professional networking, that covers like a whole bunch of different kinds of professionals. But there are some professionals, like doctors, that have special needs that other professionals don't. So for example, doctors, they like to receive messages from other doctors. They don't like to receive electronic messages from patients because it gives them liability and they don't get paid. They also like free tools, like a free fax number, which is important in healthcare because it turns out you still have to fax a bunch of stuff. It's ridiculous, but that's what it is. So like with Doximity, we weren't trying to build the average or the second best professional network. We were trying to build the best physician professional network. And because we had that focus, because we were segmenting the market and going after something we could do better than the established player, then Doximity could also be one of these high-value creators, and in fact, that's what happened. So that's a little bit about normal distribution and parallels. Any questions? Sorry, I don't know what's left. Okay, no? Great. All right, next. You are an investor in your career. I'll try to go really fast because I got like 12 minutes. So as you think about where you want to work or what you want to do, you do have to actually put that Marc Andreessen venture capitalist hat on. And whatever job you're going to take or company you're trying to start, like you have to think a little bit like, is this company, does it have a chance of doing really, really well and being one of the big winners? Or is it an average company and not a lot of growth prospects? Because you probably want to join the former, not the latter. So like, how do you tell? How do you know, where do you do your summer internship? Like, who do you try to work for? What markets do you go after? If you try to distill, like, what do VCs do in a single sentence, they look for exceptional teams or exceptional traction. And so an exceptional team is something like a CEO that has taken a company public and now is starting another company in a similar market. Like they've proven themselves. Like yeah, they can start a company and take it public because they just did. That's what I saw in Jeff Tangman in Doximity. So I went to work for him and it worked out really well. Now not everyone's going to be an amazing individual. Zuckerberg was a college dropout when he started Facebook. But anyone who was using Facebook or around colleges at the time, you could tell, like, hey, this product has huge traction. Like half the campus is using this every day, and it's taken this big role in people's lives. So if you see that kind of traction that you can understand, then that's probably a good opportunity as well. If a company or opportunity doesn't have either of these things, you should be really skeptical. Because even if someone has raised a bunch of money or they're really charismatic and they're trying to recruit you, if you don't actually know that they are indeed the real deal or that their product or direction has real traction, you may be heading into like a Theranos situation, where someone has just like made up a bunch of stuff, or more likely it's just going to be yet another company that just doesn't succeed very well. So you have to make this analysis yourself. Like no one's going to do it for you. You have to analyze like why am I working in this business? Why does it make sense to me? Question.
Yeah, so I know that Snapchat, when it started to gain traction, Facebook looked to destroy it, and that didn't really work out for Facebook. But how are you supposed to compete against like Facebook or Google when you're trying to like create a company?
Great question. Yeah. So there's definitely lots of different ways to approach that. You don't want to just like do a front-on assault, like let me try to clone your features. You'll never be able to do it. You don't have the community, the brand. You have to exploit some asymmetry. Whether it's like a new technology that they haven't had the time to launch something in yet, and that they are, for whatever reason, going to struggle to use that new technology. And, perhaps you're doing a PhD in something that's new, and you are the world expert in an area that Facebook doesn't have you because you're not working there yet. More common is this segmenting of the market. So like Facebook has to have a product for everyone, and that actually limits what they can do. Like Facebook can't launch a feature that's like a doctor feature because most people aren't doctors. And so Facebook, most users will look at that feature and be like, what is this? This is confusing. So Facebook can't launch that feature, but a startup can, right? So if you think about what are the smaller markets, the smaller segments that maybe aren't being fully served by these existing bigger players, particularly if you can make the case that they're a beachhead market, and once you are serving that smaller segment really well, you'll be able to grow to other segments and kind of continue to exploit this asymmetry that will prevent the bigger players from just cloning. Now that can be really risky, and what's happening now is Facebook is just straight up cloning Snapchat, across a bunch of products, and Snapchat is definitely struggling because of that. That's just a reality of that particular market. But you see the same kind of dynamic in a bunch of other markets as well. Cool. All right. Okay, last learning, just tying into the kind of risk and kind of what makes a startup a good opportunity or not. It is important to kind of understand this notion of types of risk. And what I mean by this is like a market risk is there's a risk that while you're building something that you won't actually be able to find customers or that customers don't actually need. Technology risk is something like, let's say you're making an augmented reality headset, or let's say you're making the Hyperloop that Elon Musk talks about. It's not at all clear that the technology is actually there to support the vision or to do it in a cost-effective way. Regulatory risk, cannabis is a big thing now. It's becoming legal. There's going to be lots of businesses that are created around it, but there's also going to be a bunch of challenges. Exactly what are the rules? What kind of establishment can offer joints when you walk in the door versus not, and like what's the legislation around that. So just kind of keep in mind different startups face different kinds of risks, and you want to match the risk that you are taking on with your skill set or the things that you understand or you'll believe in. So if you're like a killer hardware engineer, going to work for an augmented reality company makes a lot of sense because you're going to bring your awesome skill set to their biggest challenge. If you're a really awesome, compliance lawyer, working for that same AR company probably doesn't make that much sense because your skill set is not going to help them with their biggest problem, and you won't even be able to tell, like, do they have what it takes to solve that technology problem or not. So just think about like what is the startup trying to do that's risky. Okay, so finishing up, 5 myths. First one. A startup is two nerdy guys coding and soldering in a garage. In this case, this is actually Steve Wozniak, Cal alum, building the first Apple Mac, Apple's V. They did super well. So there's a lot of these, but they're not the only type. The truth is there's all kinds of startups, all kinds of founders in every industry. For example, the shirt I got with a company called Stitch Fix. They are a service that mails you clothes so you don't have to go shopping. If you're like me, like I like nice clothes, but I don't like to go shopping. Founded by an MBA, a female who was a technical, non-technical undergrad. And they're doing super well. They'll probably go public soon. So basically all of you can be a founder if you want. Second myth, most startups are consumer social or they have lots of VC funding. There's this huge selection bias that you hear about Facebook and Google and Snapchat because they're consumer companies, they're trying to get you as users. And because they have all these users, a media publication like TechCrunch will write about these companies because then there will be lots of people that will read those articles. That does not actually map to like the size of the opportunities or how successful these companies are or what the most exciting spaces to be an entrepreneur in are. And so you really have to kind of realize like, the majority of opportunities are not social and raising a bunch of money. The majority of opportunities are actually like build things that businesses need, like solve businesses' problems, and then they'll pay you money because they're businesses and they have money. And if they do that, you can often get a business to fund your first product, so you don't need to raise any money at all. Or you raise it down the road for sales and marketing growth and not to do your core product development. Then you keep more of your company and you don't worry about your investors trying to fire you and put in another CEO in your place. Do keep in mind, most startups, most entrepreneurs are actually in business to business, and the way that you know what businesses need is usually to work in those businesses for a while. So like a very common career path is graduate, go work for some company in some space that you get to know really well and understand like what does that business need to do even better, and then you can leave and kind of build a product that business is going to buy from you. And you got your buyers is basically your former colleagues, and you know exactly what their pain points are. Third myth: startups are glamorous and will make you rich, and they're big parties. I wish that were true. That'd be fun. The reality is startups are like ultra marathons for one home run swing. So it's a lot of work over a lot of time, and then you take this home run swing, and hopefully you connect. And a lot of times you don't, and you strike out. So it can be grueling and challenging. It's definitely not like all glamour and fun. Hopefully you don't think that. If you do think that and you get into startups, you realize very quickly that it's not the case. The flip side of that, some people will say, startups, like that's super risky. Like, are you crazy? You go do something traditional. The truth is, I believe startups are a lot less risky than going into a dying industry. And again, I don't mean to pick on specific occupations, but say journalism. It seemed like a very respectable career path, 20 years ago. It turns out that the business model of these regional newspapers that used to hire all these journalisms has collapsed because the revenue was all advertising. You now get it on Craigslist and other places, Google and Facebook. So it's really tough to be a journalist these days, and that's going to get repeated across many other industries. And so that's a far bigger risk than going and working for any one individual startup, because the skills that you develop, as I mentioned earlier, and the skills that they will hire you for, those apply to other startups as well. And so if you're working for one and it goes under or it starts not doing great, if you have become a valuable employee, there will be other places that will hire you. There will also be traditional companies, incumbents like Macy's or Ford, like they're trying to hire people from here who have worked in startups in areas that they're interested in. So it's actually not that risky to go work in a startup and build those skill sets because you're kind of guaranteed to be putting yourself in new areas that are growing in the economy, and that's a good place to be. And then last myth, a room that looks a lot like this one, you need an MBA or CSDP to start a business. I mentioned earlier, there's lots of counterexamples. One that I like, a company called Eligible in the healthcare space. They help doctors and hospitals determine if a patient is covered by insurance for a particular treatment. So it's like an API product, super technical. The founder is an actress who left New York to go be a salesperson at another company in the healthcare space. And she was a very successful sales rep, and then she started this company, Eligible. So no MBA, no coding experience, but she knew how to talk to people and how to sell stuff, and now she's a very successful founder in that space. So that's the myths. That's my email, write it down, and I would love to help you in your startup and entrepreneurship endeavors, and hopefully this was interesting. and I'm sure you can, I'll write it down or something later. And time for questions. Question?
So you said like most of the core product development comes from like the person, the founder himself, before we get the funding. So, but then for that would require a degree, right? Like in a related field.
Not necessarily. You can hire co-founders to build it for you. So if you are, if you can lead people and convince them of this vision, and ideally say like, hey, we already have a buyer. Like someone has already signed and said they will pay X money for this. Then you can, it's actually not that hard to find someone to help you build it.
We have time for one more, yes.
Go quickly, go.
No, because I already asked the question.
So why did somebody want to buy you out instead of just ignore you and kill you later?
They definitely could have done that. When you're an early stage startup, you're looking for awesome employees that share your vision. And when someone shows up and like has independently arrived at the same vision and has those skill sets that I had built in YC, having been a founder before, then you're an attractive employee for them. So yeah, that wound up being a really good opportunity. Oh yeah, I mentioned mentors earlier too. Like Jeff was a great mentor to me, and finding that great mentor early in your career is really important because those people will teach you a lot of things that you aren't learning in classes, but that will help you be successful throughout the rest of your career. Cool.
Marcio wouldn't mind staying for a bit outside and answering a few of your questions.
Sure. Awesome. Thanks. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Please remember to, on your email for the homework, make sure everybody did it pretty much